Black girl denied. First class seat, unaware her father owns the airline. Emma stared at the gift envelope in her hands, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Inside was a first-class plane ticket, a gift from her father, William. The trip wasn't just any trip. It was her reward for months of hard work, long nights studying, and the sacrifices she'd made to excel in school. "I'm so proud of you, Emma," her father said, his voice steady yet filled with warmth. William was a man who believed in teaching through action, and this gift was a symbol of his deep belief in rewarding effort. 16-year-old Emma wasn't used to extravagance. Their lives were comfortable but modest, built on her father's steady job as a financial consultant and his dedication to providing for her. This ticket, however, represented a world Emma had only seen in movies or overheard in the conversations of her more privileged classmates. "First class?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. William nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've earned it, kid. You work harder than anyone I know. You deserve to experience something special." Emma threw her arms around him, her excitement momentarily pushing aside the faint nervousness brewing in her chest. The morning of the flight, Emma meticulously packed her carry-on, carefully choosing a neat but simple outfit: dark jeans, a white button-down shirt, and a cardigan. She knew that first-class passengers often carried themselves with a certain elegance, and while she didn't own designer clothes, she hoped her appearance would reflect the pride she felt in herself. Arriving at the airport, Emma couldn't help but feel awestruck. The bright terminal lights, bustling crowds, and sleek displays advertising luxury travel made her feel like she'd stepped into another world. As she approached the check-in counter, she noticed the attendant's surprised glance at her ticket. "You're flying first class today?" the woman asked, her tone polite but subtly laced with skepticism. "Yes," Emma replied, holding her head high despite the small pang in her chest. "All right then, enjoy your flight," the attendant said, forcing a smile. Emma walked away, her confidence slightly shaken. She told herself it didn't matter. People could think whatever they wanted. She belonged here just as much as anyone else. As Emma approached the security line, the divide between passengers became clear. On one side, business travelers and families hurried through TSA pre-check lines, while others, including Emma, waited in the longer queue. A group of teenagers behind her laughed loudly, their laughter tinged with something Emma couldn't quite place. She glanced over her shoulder and caught them staring at her backpack, faded but well-loved. By the time she reached the boarding gate, Emma's excitement had returned, though she felt a lingering tension in the air. She glanced at the priority boarding area, where men in suits and women clutching designer handbags stood waiting. Emma's presence seemed to catch a few curious glances, though no one said anything. When the announcement for first-class boarding came, Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward. As she handed her boarding pass to the agent, she felt a flicker of doubt. Was she ready for this? "Enjoy your flight," the agent said with a smile. Emma walked down the jet bridge, her heart racing. This was it, her first experience of first-class travel. She couldn't wait to see what awaited her. The first-class cabin was as luxurious as she had imagined. Plush leather seats, ample legroom, and an air of calm sophistication greeted her as she stepped in. Emma couldn't help but feel a bit out of place among the passengers already seated. She caught glimpses of crisp suits, sleek laptops, and elegant carry-ons. Her seat, 2A, was by the window. Emma carefully placed her backpack in the overhead bin and sat down, running her fingers over the soft leather armrest. She couldn't believe this was real. As she settled in, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, miss." Emma looked up to see a flight attendant, a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a sharp uniform. The woman's name tag read, Jennifer. "Yes," Emma replied politely. Jennifer's expression was neutral, but her tone carried an unmistakable edge. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Emma blinked, startled by the question. "Yes, this is 2A. Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Emma hesitated for a moment, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She reached into her pocket and handed over the ticket. Jennifer examined it carefully, her lips pursed. "Well," Jennifer said after a pause, handing the ticket back, "I suppose everything is in order." Emma felt her cheeks flush. Suppose. She had shown her ticket. It was in order. She forced herself to look out the window, trying to ignore the faint murmur of voices from other passengers. As Jennifer walked away, Emma could feel the weight of the cabin's atmosphere shift. Some passengers glanced her way, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Emma gripped the armrest, willing herself to stay calm. She thought of her father's words. "You define your own worth, Emma. Don't let anyone make you feel small." For the rest of the boarding process, Emma kept her eyes focused on the view outside. She watched as the ground crew moved around the tarmac, trying to distract herself from the growing unease in her chest. Her excitement for the trip had dimmed, replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had every right to be here. Emma didn't realize it yet, but the challenges of this flight were just beginning. Emma tried to shake off the awkward exchange with Jennifer. She adjusted her cardigan and busied herself with the in-flight magazine, flipping through glossy photos of tropical destinations. Her heart still raced from the encounter, but she reminded herself that her ticket was just as valid as anyone else's. Passengers continued to trickle into the cabin, their suitcases gliding silently along the plush carpet. Emma noticed the way most of them carried themselves, confident, polished, as if this kind of luxury was second nature. A few glanced in her direction, their expressions difficult to read. She couldn't tell if it was curiosity, disdain, or simple indifference, but the weight of their eyes pressed on her like a heavy coat. One man in a tailored suit paused briefly as he walked by, giving her a quick once-over before taking his seat in 2B, directly across the aisle from her. He didn't say anything, but the slight arch of his brow was enough to make Emma look down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious about her chipped nail polish. The cabin door closed with a soft thud, signaling that everyone was on board. Jennifer returned to the front of the cabin, her posture immaculate, her movements precise. Emma watched as she greeted other passengers, her tone noticeably warmer than it had been with Emma. "Can I bring you a glass of champagne to start, Mr. Davidson?" Jennifer asked the man in 2B with a smile. "Of course," he replied, his voice smooth and effortless. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't been offered anything yet, not even water. She debated whether to speak up, but the knot in her stomach stopped her. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing the flight details. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Emma tried to focus on the excitement she'd felt earlier that morning. This was supposed to be special, a memory she'd carry forever. But the whispers started again. From behind her, Emma caught snippets of hushed conversations. "She doesn't look like she belongs here. Maybe it's a mistake. Someone probably paid for her seat." Her throat tightened. She didn't dare turn around, but she could feel the weight of their words pressing into her back like sharp pins. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Jennifer reappeared, walking briskly down the aisle. She stopped abruptly at Emma's row, her expression neutral but her tone still cold. "Miss, can I check your ticket again?" Emma froze. "I already showed it to you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I just need to confirm one more time," Jennifer replied, her words clipped. Emma hesitated, feeling the heat of every pair of eyes in the cabin. She reached for her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly, and handed Jennifer the ticket once again. Jennifer examined it, as if searching for an excuse to challenge it. After what felt like an eternity, she handed it back with a curt nod. "Fine," she said, "just making sure." Emma felt her face burn with humiliation as Jennifer walked away. The murmurs started again, and this time she caught the word charity among the whispers. The plane began to ascend, but Emma felt like she was sinking deeper into her seat. She stared out the window, trying to blink away the sting of tears. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." But it was hard, so hard. Her thoughts were interrupted when Jennifer returned, this time accompanied by a man in uniform, the gate agent. Emma's heart sank. "I just wanted to confirm there wasn't a mix-up with this passenger's ticket," Jennifer said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. The agent looked at Emma, his expression apologetic but uncomfortable. "Miss, could I see your boarding pass?" Emma's hands shook as she handed over the ticket for the third time. The agent scanned it carefully, then looked at Jennifer. "This is correct," he said. "She's in the right seat." Jennifer frowned but said nothing, turning on her heel and walking away. The agent handed the ticket back to Emma, offering her a small, strained smile. "Enjoy your flight," he said quietly, before retreating down the aisle. Emma wanted to disappear. She could feel the other passengers' stares burning into her, some sympathetic, others still filled with doubt. She kept her eyes on her lap, willing herself not to cry. Across the aisle, the man in 2B leaned forward slightly, clearing his throat. "Hey," he said softly. Emma looked up, startled. "Don't let her get to you," he said, his voice kind. "Some people just think they can judge others by how they look." Emma managed a small nod, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. As the plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign turned off, Emma closed her eyes, trying to center herself. She didn't know how she was going to get through the rest of this flight, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let anyone see her cry. She wasn't ready to give up yet. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a constant white noise that should have been soothing. But for Emma, every passing second felt like a test of her resilience. She could still feel the heat of embarrassment from the earlier confrontation. Her palms were clammy, and her heart thudded in her chest as if it hadn't yet caught up to the stillness of the cruising altitude. She tried to distract herself, reaching for the in-flight menu tucked into the seat pocket. The options were luxurious: filet mignon, artisanal cheeses, a wine list that stretched for pages. It was a world so far removed from her usual life that, under normal circumstances, she would have been thrilled. But now, even the menu felt like a reminder of how out of place she must seem to everyone around her. A new flight attendant appeared. She was younger, with a softer expression than Jennifer's. Her name tag read Lila. "Would you like something to drink, miss?" Lila asked, her tone warm and genuine. Emma hesitated, glancing toward Jennifer, who was stationed at the front of the cabin, her sharp gaze sweeping over the passengers. "Just water, please," Emma replied quietly. "Of course." Lila smiled, disappearing toward the galley. As Emma waited, a voice broke through the relative quiet of the cabin. "You know," said a woman seated a few rows back, her tone carrying just enough volume to ensure she was heard. "It's so easy for people to scam their way into these seats these days." Emma stiffened. "I mean, we work hard for this, don't we? It's not something just anyone can afford," the woman continued, her words dripping with passive aggression. Another voice chimed in, this time a man's. "Exactly. If they just start letting anyone in here, what's the point?" Emma's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of her armrest. She felt the tears welling again, but refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. Lila returned with her water, placing it gently on Emma's tray table. "Here you go," she said with a small smile, her kindness a brief balm to Emma's frayed nerves. "Thanks," Emma murmured. But before Lila could move away, Jennifer reappeared, her heels clicking sharply against the carpeted floor. She stopped next to Emma's seat, her arms crossed. "Miss," Jennifer began, her voice carrying the same sharp edge it had before. "Just so you're aware, this is a premium cabin. There are expectations for behavior and decorum." Emma blinked up at her, confused. I haven't done anything." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "I'm just making sure you understand." Her tone was icy, condescending. At that moment, the man in 2B, who had been quietly observing the interaction, spoke up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm, "but I think she's been perfectly respectful. What exactly is the issue here?" Jennifer's composure faltered for a brief moment, her eyes flicking toward him. "No issue," she replied curtly. "Just making sure everything is in order." "Well, it seems to me that everything is in order," the man said pointedly. He leaned back in his seat, giving Jennifer a look that made it clear he wasn't buying her act. Jennifer's jaw tightened, but she said nothing further. Instead, she turned on her heel and strode back to the front of the cabin. Emma glanced at the man, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. "Don't let her get to you." The remainder of the flight was a blur of discomfort. Emma tried to distract herself by looking out the window or scrolling through the in-flight entertainment system, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers, and even though no one else said anything directly to her, their judgment hung in the air like a storm cloud. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "You define your own worth." But in this moment, it felt impossible to live up to that advice. She didn't belong here. That much was obvious to everyone around her. And then, just when Emma thought she might make it through the flight by staying as small and invisible as possible, she heard a commotion at the front of the cabin. "Mr. Hayes, welcome aboard," Jennifer said, her voice suddenly saccharine. Emma froze. She knew that name. Her father had arrived. William Hayes walked into the cabin with the kind of quiet confidence that commanded attention. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he exuded an air of authority and composure. His sharp eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on Emma. In an instant, his expression softened into one of concern. He approached her seat with purposeful strides, placing a hand on her shoulder as he leaned down. "Emma," he said gently, "are you all right?" Emma looked up at him, her emotions threatening to spill over. "Dad, it's nothing," she whispered. William straightened and turned toward the rest of the cabin, his sharp gaze now focused on Jennifer. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm, "but I'd like to know what's going on here." Jennifer, who had been hovering near the front, hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his presence. "There's no issue, sir," she said quickly. "Everything is fine." "Really?" William replied, raising an eyebrow. "Because my daughter doesn't seem fine. She looks upset, and judging by the way you've been treating her, I'd say there's a very clear issue." The cabin went silent. Every passenger was now watching the scene unfold, their earlier whispers replaced by an uneasy quiet. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, but William didn't give her the chance. "I'd like to speak with the captain," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jennifer hesitated, but before she could argue, another flight attendant, Lila, stepped forward. "I'll get the captain for you, sir," she said quickly, shooting Jennifer a pointed look. William nodded in gratitude and turned back to Emma, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "Don't worry," he said softly, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "I've got this." And for the first time since the flight began, Emma started to believe him. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick with tension. The faint hum of the plane's engines seemed louder in the silence as William stood protectively by Emma's seat. Passengers who had been whispering now sat rigid in their chairs, their eyes darting between him and Jennifer. Jennifer, clearly rattled, shifted on her feet. She tried to regain her composure, smoothing the hem of her uniform. "Sir, there's really no need to involve the captain," she said, forcing a tight smile. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," William repeated, his voice calm but razor-sharp. He straightened, his height and commanding presence making Jennifer shrink slightly. "From where I'm standing, it seems like you've gone out of your way to humiliate my daughter in front of this entire cabin." I was simply following protocol," Jennifer stammered, her confident demeanor beginning to crack. "Protocol?" William's tone grew colder. "Your protocol involved publicly questioning her ticket, bringing in a gate agent, and addressing her with condescension while ignoring the basic decency you've shown every other passenger here." Emma felt her throat tighten. Seeing her father so composed, so sure of himself, filled her with both relief and a lingering ache. She wished she could stand up for herself the way he was doing for her now. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, but the cabin door opened and the captain stepped through. He was a tall man with graying hair and an air of authority that rivaled William's. Lila followed closely behind him, her expression serious. "Is there a problem here?" the captain asked, his voice even but firm as he looked between William and Jennifer. William stepped forward, gesturing toward Emma. "Yes, there is. My daughter has been the target of blatant mistreatment from this flight attendant simply because she doesn't fit some preconceived notion of what a first-class passenger should look like." The captain's gaze shifted to Jennifer, who paled under his scrutiny. "Jennifer, is this true?" he asked. Jennifer hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. "Captain, I was only trying to ensure that the passenger was seated in the correct cabin," she said defensively. "There was confusion about her ticket." "There was no confusion," William interrupted, his voice like steel. "She showed her ticket multiple times. The only confusion here seems to be Jennifer's inability to treat all passengers with the same respect." The captain's jaw tightened, and he turned back to Jennifer. "I'll need to speak with you privately," he said. His tone left no room for argument. Jennifer looked like she wanted to protest, but under the captain's gaze, she reluctantly nodded and followed him toward the galley. The cabin remained silent as the tension slowly began to dissipate. Emma looked around, noticing that many passengers now avoided her gaze. Some appeared uncomfortable, others ashamed. William sat down in the empty seat next to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Emma nodded, though her voice trembled when she spoke. "I didn't want to cause a scene." "You didn't," William said firmly. "They did. And I wasn't going to stand by and let them treat you like that." Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. I don't get it, Dad. Why do they care so much about me being here?" William sighed, his expression thoughtful. "Because some people think they can measure someone's worth by how they look, what they wear, or where they come from. But that's their ignorance, Emma, not yours." His words sank in, easing some of the weight in her chest. Minutes later, the captain returned to the cabin, his expression calm but serious. Jennifer was not with him. He addressed the passengers, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for the disruption earlier. It's our priority to ensure that every passenger is treated with respect and dignity. I regret to inform you that a member of our crew has been reassigned for the remainder of this flight." There were murmurs of surprise, but the captain quickly continued. "We appreciate your understanding, and I personally want to assure you that this matter will be addressed further after we land." He glanced at William and Emma, offering a brief but genuine nod before returning to the cockpit. The mood in the cabin shifted. Lila returned to Emma's seat with an apologetic smile. "Miss Hayes, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for what happened earlier," she said softly. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, please let me know." Emma gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she replied. Lila placed a warm cookie wrapped in a napkin on Emma's tray table. "I thought this might help." Emma chuckled softly, some of the tension in her shoulders finally easing. As the flight continued, William leaned back in his seat, his presence still grounding her. Emma could tell he wasn't just upset. He was proud of her, even if she didn't feel particularly strong in that moment. Across the aisle, the man in 2B caught her eye. He gave her an encouraging nod, as if to say, "You handled that well." Emma felt a flicker of confidence returning. For the first time since the flight began, she didn't feel quite so small. And as she looked out the window at the endless blue sky, she realized something her father had been trying to teach her all along. Her worth wasn't tied to what anyone else thought of her. It was something she carried within herself, something no one could take away. As the hours of the flight passed, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin settled into an uneasy calm. The earlier commotion had left a mark, one that couldn't be ignored. Emma sat quietly, sipping her water and gazing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to relax, even if just a little. Her father remained at her side, exuding the kind of quiet confidence that made her feel safe. Emma glanced at him, her mind replaying the way he'd stood up for her. She had always admired his strength, but now she understood it in a new way. It wasn't just about commanding respect, it was about using his voice to protect and uplift others. As the flight attendants moved about the cabin, Emma noticed the subtle changes in their behavior. Lila was attentive, checking on her and William regularly, her kindness genuine and unforced. Even the passengers seemed different. A woman in the row behind them, who earlier had whispered about Emma not belonging, leaned forward and spoke softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," the woman said, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions." Emma turned to her, surprised. For a moment she didn't know what to say, but then she remembered her father's advice to always handle challenges with grace. "Thank you," Emma replied, her voice steady. "I appreciate that." The woman nodded, retreating to her seat, her expression one of genuine regret. Across the aisle, the man in 2B, who had defended her earlier, gave her another nod of encouragement. "You're handling this like a pro," he said with a faint smile. Emma felt a small swell of pride. Maybe she wasn't as out of place here as she'd thought. As the flight neared its destination, Lila returned to their row, holding a small tray with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "This is from me," she said with a warm smile, placing the glasses on their tray tables. "A toast to a father and daughter who remind us what really matters up here." Emma and William exchanged a glance before lifting their glasses. "To resilience," William said, his voice low but full of meaning. "To grace," Emma replied, smiling at him. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into the city. Emma felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The ordeal had been exhausting, but it had also been transformative. She looked at her reflection in the window, seeing not just a teenager trying to fit into a new world, but someone who had faced a challenge and come out stronger. As the plane touched down, Emma felt a sense of accomplishment. The trip that had started with humiliation and doubt was ending on a note of resilience and pride. At the gate, as passengers gathered their belongings, a few stopped to offer Emma quiet words of apology or encouragement. One older woman placed a hand on Emma's shoulder and said, "You're stronger than most people I know, young lady." Emma smiled, her confidence growing with every kind word. Jennifer, notably absent from the rest of the flight, didn't appear as the crew stood at the door to bid the passengers farewell. Instead, it was Lila who handed Emma and William a small card as they disembarked. Inside, in neat handwriting, was a simple message. "Thank you for reminding us that dignity matters more than appearances." Emma tucked the card into her bag, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. Walking through the terminal, Emma turned to her father. "Dad," she began, her voice steady but thoughtful, "do you think people like Jennifer ever change?" William considered her question, his expression pensive. "Sometimes they do," he said, "but not always. What matters is that you don't let them change you. You stood tall today, Emma, and that's something no one can take from you." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had learned so much in just a few short hours, about herself, about others, and about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was uncomfortable. As they exited the airport, Emma looked out at the bustling city beyond. For the first time, she felt like she could take on anything. The doubts and insecurities that had plagued her earlier now felt smaller, more manageable. This wasn't just a trip, it was a turning point, and as Emma walked beside her father, her head held high, she knew that she would carry the lessons of this flight with her for the rest of her life.